Story 1. The house was steeped in silence, the kind that presses against your skin and settles in your bones. It was the early hours of the morning, a time when the world still slumbered, cocooned in the safety of the dark. I sat at my desk, eyes flicking toward the clock, calculating if I had time to grab a cup of coffee before diving into the next task. The stillness was comforting, a rare moment of solitude before the day unraveled into its usual chaos. I let out a slow breath and reached for my phone, tapping the screen to check my messages. As the display blinked to life, something caught my eye. A smear. A faint, greasy smudge stretched across the front camera. I frowned. I hadn't touched it, hadn't used the front camera at all. My fingers moved instinctively, wiping the lens with the sleeve of my shirt. But the smear remained, stubborn and unmoved, as if something had pressed against it recently. A chill crept down my spine. My heart thudded heavier in my chest as I glanced around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence. The air felt thick, charged. It was absurd, really. No one had been here but me. The doors were locked, the house undisturbed. I shook my head, forcing down the unease that prickled at my skin. It was just a smudge. Nothing more. Yet, something about it felt wrong. I turned the phone over in my hands, holding it up to the light. The smear was perfectly centered, almost deliberate. I ran my thumb over it, expecting it to fade, but it didn't. My breath hitched. I had been alone all night. No one had entered my room. No one had touched my phone. So why was there a mark on my camera? I checked the time again. Barely an hour had passed since I woke up, and in that time, I hadn't once used the front camera. And yet, here it was, a smudge, a fingerprint-sized mark in the dead center of the lens. A quiet, irrational dread curled in my stomach. I set the phone down carefully, rubbing my temples, trying to shake the nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. As I reached for my coffee, my gaze drifted back to the phone, sitting on the desk like an innocent object, just another piece of my daily life. But then, it flickered. A tiny, almost imperceptible shimmer on the screen. Like something had interacted with it. My breath stilled. My fingers clenched around the mug as I hesitated, then slowly reached for the phone again. My hands trembled as I lifted it, angling it so the front camera faced me. The smudge was still there. But something else was, too. The reflection in the lens was off. Distorted. Warped. As if someone, or something, was standing just behind me. I whipped around, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The room was empty. The door was locked. The blinds were drawn. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I turned back to the phone, willing myself to believe it had just been a trick of the light. But when I glanced at the screen again, the reflection was sharper. Clearer. And unmistakably human. Someone was there. Someone who shouldn't be. I dropped the phone onto the desk, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The sensation of being watched clung to me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. I pulled the blanket from the couch and wrapped it around myself, as if the warmth might shield me from the growing dread. But it didn't. If anything, the unease only deepened. Hours passed. The house stirred awake. My children moved through the morning routine, their voices breaking the eerie quiet. But even as life returned to normal, I couldn't stop glancing at the phone. The smudge never faded, and neither did the nagging feeling in my gut. Once the house emptied out for the day, I was alone again. Alone with the silence. Alone with the phone. Alone with whatever was lurking just beyond my sight. My fingers hovered over the screen before I made a decision. I opened the camera and took a picture. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just my face, staring back at me, tired and pale. But then, I zoomed in. My stomach twisted violently. There. In the background. A shadow. Faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. I froze. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe it was just the way the light filtered through the room. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe. No. The more I stared, the clearer it became. The outline of a figure, lurking behind me. A shape where there should be nothing. I turned sharply, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. The room was empty. Silent. Just as it had been. Yet I knew. I knew what I had seen. And I knew that whatever it was, it had seen me, too. The next few hours blurred into a haze of unease and restless pacing. I told myself it was paranoia. That I had been staring at the screen too long. That my mind was playing tricks on me. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the feeling persisted. That night, after the house had settled into sleep, I sat alone in the dark. The phone lay on the table, the smudge on its camera an unspoken message, a mark of something sinister. My fingers hovered over it, hesitating. Then, with a deep breath, I picked it up and activated the front camera one last time. The smear remained. But now, so did something else. A face. Not mine. A face with wide, staring eyes and lips twisted into a cruel, knowing grin. I gasped and stumbled back, the phone slipping from my grasp. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, the screen shattering upon impact. The sound echoed in the stillness, a jagged fracture in the quiet. My hands trembled as I stood there, staring at the broken device, waiting, dreading, that something would emerge from the shadows. But nothing came. The house remained silent. The darkness held its breath. The next morning, I picked up the phone, my fingers hesitant against the broken glass. I powered it on, half expecting to see that terrible face once more. But the screen was blank. The camera was clean. The smudge was gone. As if nothing had ever happened. And yet, I knew better. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. And deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew one thing for certain. Something had been watching me. And it still was. Story 2. The cafe was nearly empty, a quiet refuge from the relentless pulse of the city. I sat in the farthest corner, cradling a lukewarm cup of coffee between my hands, the ceramic warm against my fingertips. The world outside continued to spin in its chaotic, unyielding rhythm, but in here, time felt slower. The gentle hum of the espresso machine, the occasional clink of a spoon against porcelain, these were the only sounds that accompanied me. It was the kind of silence that felt like a balm to the exhaustion that had been creeping into my bones all week. I had been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes, lost in my thoughts, aimlessly scrolling through my phone, when it vibrated against the wooden table. A single notification. Absent-mindedly, I opened the message, expecting some mundane text, a reminder from work, an update from a friend. But as soon as my eyes landed on the words, my breath hitched. I can see you now. The simplicity of the message sent a ripple of unease through me. My grip on the phone tightened as an icy weight settled in my stomach. I glanced up instinctively, my eyes sweeping across the cafe. There were only a few other patrons, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a woman typing away at her laptop, a young couple murmuring to each other at a table near the window. No one was looking at me. The barista behind the counter was focused on the milk frother, his back turned. There was no one paying attention to me at all. Yet, someone was watching. A nervous laugh escaped me as I tried to shake off the feeling. It had to be a prank, someone with the wrong number messing around. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed out a reply. Who is this? I hit send and waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. I glanced around again, but everything remained unchanged. Normal. Safe. And yet, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was wrong. I could feel it. My phone vibrated again. I inhaled sharply before glancing at the screen. I'm behind you. A cold chill swept down my spine. I turned so fast my chair scraped against the floor with an awful screech. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one there. Just the same customers, the same barista, the same quiet hum of the cafe. My heart pounded against my ribs, my palms damp with sweat. I scanned every face, searching for someone, anyone, who might be playing a cruel joke. But no one seemed aware of my growing fear. No one acknowledged me at all. I swallowed hard. My rational mind screamed that this was just a coincidence, some stranger playing games. But deep down, something primal whispered otherwise. I stood abruptly, grabbing my bag and stuffing my phone into my pocket. I needed to get out of there. The cafe, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating, its walls pressing in on me. I forced my legs to move toward the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. As my hand closed around the door handle, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, dread curling around my ribs like a vice. Slowly, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Goodbye. My breath hitched. The word settled into my bones like a finality I didn't understand. I didn't wait for another message. I shoved my phone back into my pocket and pushed out into the cold evening air. The street was quieter than I expected, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. My car was parked just down the road, and I hurried toward it, my heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. As I fumbled with my keys, a suffocating feeling of being watched crawled up my spine. I couldn't shake it. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. I exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel like it was my only lifeline. Another buzz. My entire body tensed. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But my hand moved on its own, pulling the phone from my pocket. Look outside. Every nerve in my body screamed, don't do it. But I did. Slowly, I turned my head and peered out the window. At first, I saw nothing. The street was empty. The sidewalk stretched ahead in eerie stillness. But then, just at the edge of the glow cast by the streetlight, where darkness swallowed the world whole, I saw it. A figure. Standing perfectly still. Watching. My breath shuddered out of me, and my blood ran ice cold. I couldn't see their face, couldn't make out any defining features. Just the silhouette of someone, unmoving, patient. Waiting. I tore my gaze away, my chest tightening with panic. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but I didn't dare look again. I didn't want to know if the figure had moved. I didn't want to see if they had stepped closer. As I drove away, I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to glance in the rearview mirror. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Story 3. The road stretched endlessly before me, bathed in the dim orange glow of flickering streetlights. The rhythmic thrum of the engine and the occasional whir of passing cars were the only sounds keeping me company. It had been a long, exhausting week, and all I wanted was the quiet solace of home. The streets were unusually empty, almost eerily so, as though the city itself had taken a breath and was holding it. I slowed as I approached a red light, tapping the brakes until the car came to a gentle stop. My fingers drummed absently on the steering wheel, my mind wandering. That's when I felt it, that prickling sensation creeping up my spine, the undeniable feeling of being watched. I glanced around, scanning the cars beside me, the sidewalks, the darkened windows of buildings. Nothing. Just the usual restless city. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. I was just tired. My mind was playing tricks on me. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate click. The unmistakable sound of my car doors unlocking. A cold wave of dread swept over me. My hands went rigid against the wheel. I hadn't touched the button. I hadn't done anything. I turned my head slowly, pulse hammering in my ears. The locks had shifted, unlocked. It made no sense. I always locked my doors, especially when stopping at lights. My heartbeat quickened as I hurriedly pressed the lock button, securing the doors again. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the car's wiring was faulty. Maybe a movement in the rearview mirror. My breath hitched. I snapped my eyes to it, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the back seat. Empty. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas, eager to put distance between myself and whatever absurd paranoia had sunk its claws into me. But the unease wouldn't leave. Every turn, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me glance at the mirror again. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Just exhausted. Just overthinking. Still, the feeling clung to me like a damp chill. Minutes later, I pulled into my destination's parking lot, killing the engine with a relieved sigh. I reached for the door handle. Click. The lock slid open again. A choked gasp escaped me. I knew I had locked them. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the button, hesitating. My eyes darted around the lot. Nothing. No one. I swallowed hard. I was being paranoid. I was being paranoid. Summoning what little courage I had left, I yanked the door open and stepped out. A quick scan of the car's interior showed nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of forced entry. No shadowed figure crouched in the back seat. Just my own reflection in the dark glass, wide-eyed and pale. And yet, the sensation lingered, the overwhelming certainty that something wasn't right. That night, I tried to shake the feeling, curling up on the couch and letting the low hum of the television lull me into some semblance of comfort. Then, my phone buzzed. I picked it up absent-mindedly, only for my stomach to drop the moment I saw the message. I'm still here. No name. No number. Just those 3 words. The room felt smaller. My breath came in shallow bursts. I reread the message, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. A prank? A wrong number? But the timing, the coincidence, it was too perfect. I barely slept, every creak of the house, every shifting shadow in the corner of my vision making me jump. That feeling of being watched pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. The next morning, hesitant but determined, I approached my car. My hands were clammy as I fumbled with the keys, heart hammering as I reached for the handle. Click. The locks disengaged before I even touched them. I froze. A breath of wind whispered past, sending a chill down my spine. And then, I felt it. A presence. A weighty, unseen gaze pressing into me. Slowly, I turned my head. Across the street, half shrouded in the dying morning mist, stood a figure. Motionless. Watching. My breath hitched. My pulse roared in my ears. I couldn't make out their face, only the dark outline of a person standing impossibly still, as if waiting for me to acknowledge them. I didn't wait. My shaking hands fumbled to yank open the door, and I threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors with frantic urgency. My foot slammed on the gas, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. But no matter how far I drove, the feeling remained. The doors kept unlocking. The messages kept coming. And now, I knew, I wasn't just being followed. I was being hunted. Story 4. The moment I stepped off the bus and into the bustling airport terminal, I was engulfed in a sea of motion. The hurried footsteps, the low murmur of conversations, the bright fluorescent lights illuminating the travelers who were all heading somewhere I was not. I had no flight that day, no destination in mind. I was simply there to pick up a friend, nothing more. Yet, despite the mundanity of my visit, a faint unease settled in my stomach, like an instinct whispering that something was off. Airports always had that effect on me. The sense of transience, of people coming and going, of fleeting moments and final goodbyes, it unsettled me in ways I could never quite explain. Still, I shook off the feeling and pressed forward, weaving through the throngs of people. That was when I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost too casual. "How was your flight?" I froze mid-step. My breath hitched as my gaze snapped toward the speaker. A man, mid-30s, dressed in a standard airport uniform. His expression was friendly, a little too friendly. His ID badge was visible, making him appear like any other airport employee, but something about the way he spoke sent a chill creeping up my spine. "What?" I blurted, convinced I must have misheard him. His smile didn't waver. "How was your flight?" he repeated, as if it was the most natural question in the world. I swallowed hard, an odd pressure building in my chest. I haven't flown anywhere," I finally managed, my voice thin, uncertain. The man's expression didn't falter. If anything, his smile widened, a knowing glint flashing in his eyes. "Oh," he mused, tilting his head slightly. "Well, maybe you've been traveling in other ways, huh?" His chuckle was light, airy. But it felt wrong, like an off-key note in an otherwise perfect melody. I took a step back, an instinctive retreat from something I didn't understand. "I think you have the wrong person," I said quickly, turning on my heel before he could respond. My pulse thudded in my ears as I headed toward the escalators, resisting the urge to look back. But the unease didn't fade. In fact, it only deepened. How had he known I was there? No one knew I was at the airport. I hadn't booked a flight. I hadn't even mentioned my plans to anyone. And yet, this man had spoken as though he expected me. As though he knew something I didn't. I shook my head, trying to dispel the paranoia creeping in. People got confused all the time, right? Maybe it was just a mistake, a miscommunication. I had almost convinced myself when my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. I hesitated. My fingers felt stiff as I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, though my heart was hammering. For a moment, silence. Then, a voice. Smooth. Calm. Familiar, yet foreign. "I hope you're enjoying your time at the airport." A cold, sickening dread pooled in my stomach. "I didn't mean to confuse you earlier," the voice continued, its tone light, conversational. But I couldn't resist asking, "How was your flight?" The blood in my veins turned to ice. My grip on the phone tightened as my breath came in short, shallow bursts. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, a soft chuckle. "You know who I am." The line went dead. I stood frozen, staring at my phone, my own reflection distorted on the screen. 1,000 thoughts swirled through my mind, none of them making sense. No one else had been there during the conversation with the airport employee. No one should have known about it. And yet, someone did. The sensation of being watched pressed down on me like an unseen weight. Every face in the crowd seemed unfamiliar yet knowing, eyes sliding over me just a second too long. I could feel them, the presence lingering just at the edge of my awareness, observing, waiting. My fingers trembled as I sent a quick text to my friend, "I'm here. Where are you?" No response. I forced myself to move, my legs carrying me toward baggage claim. The throng of travelers blurred together, a shifting mass of bodies that felt suffocating. The overhead announcements droned on, but their words were lost on me. All I could hear was the echo of that voice, the whisper of something I couldn't name. Then, finally, my friend emerged from the crowd, waving as they spotted me. Relief surged through me, but the unease didn't lift. "Hey!" "How's it going?" they greeted cheerfully. I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as forced as it felt. "Yeah, just waiting around." As we walked out of the airport together, I tried, desperately, to push the encounter from my mind. To tell myself that it was nothing. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. I never saw the man again. The phone call never came back. Yet, even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is still watching. And that somehow, they knew exactly where I had been. Even if I had never been there at all. Story 5. The day had drained every ounce of energy from me, endless meetings, suffocating deadlines, the mind-numbing rhythm of corporate life. By the time I returned home, the only thing I craved was sleep. But habits die hard. I sat at my desk, intending to go over a few last-minute details before calling it a night. That's when I saw it. A manila envelope, resting atop my neatly stacked papers. A cold prickle ran down my spine. I didn't remember leaving it there. I reached out hesitantly, my fingertips grazing the smooth surface. It was colder than the air around it. My name was printed on the front in sharp, precise black letters, no return address, no markings, nothing to suggest where it had come from. The rational part of me said it was just another work-related document, misplaced in my exhaustion. But something about it felt off. Swallowing down the unease curling in my stomach, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. As I unfolded it, my eyes skimmed the text, expecting the mundane jargon of office paperwork. But the words made no sense. My breath hitched. The document was professionally formatted, official in every way, yet entirely foreign to me. And at the bottom, in bold, unmistakable ink, my signature. The air around me felt suffocating as my heart pounded against my ribs. I had signed countless papers in my career, memorized the curves and strokes of my own name. This was mine. But I had never seen this document before. Confidential details littered the page, agreements and decisions I had no recollection of making. It was as if someone had reached into my mind, pulled out my signature, and placed it at the bottom of a deal I had never agreed to. A deep, creeping dread took hold. Who did this? And why? I set the paper down carefully, as though it were something poisonous. My hands were trembling. My first instinct was to call someone, my boss, a colleague, anyone who could make sense of this, but a gnawing hesitation stopped me. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if someone had done this on purpose? I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed the company's main line. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Hello, this is Alex. How can I help you?" "Alex, it's me." My throat felt dry. I found a document with my signature on it, but I never signed it. "Can you check if anything's been processed under my name recently?" There was silence. Too long of a pause. My grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not seeing anything unusual," Alex finally responded, his tone calm but cautious. "Are you sure it's your signature?" "I know my own signature," I snapped, my voice raw with fear. "But I swear, I never signed this. I don't even know what this document is." Another pause. Then, "Stay calm. It might just be a clerical error. I'll have someone review your recent paperwork and get back to you." I hung up. My stomach churned with unease. A clerical error wouldn't explain this. This was something more. Something deliberate. My signature was being used for something beyond my control. The weight of the realization sent a chill through me. If someone had access to my signature, what else could they do? Could they authorize transactions? Approve deals? Set things in motion under my name? My head throbbed with the implications. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I scrolled to another number, my lawyer's office. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Good evening, this is Maria. How can I assist you? Maria, I need your help, I blurted out, my voice tight with urgency. I found a document with my signature on it, but I never signed it. Someone is forging my name. There was a beat of silence before her tone shifted to one of careful professionalism. That's a serious accusation. Are you certain it isn't a mistake? I'm positive, I said firmly. I don't know where this came from, but I need to find out before it's too late. All right, she said. We'll need to meet as soon as possible. I'll have my assistant set up an appointment for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, keep the document safe. Don't share it with anyone. And whatever you do, don't sign anything else. I hung up and exhaled shakily. My gaze flickered back to the document, now locked away in my desk drawer, but its presence still loomed like a dark shadow in the room. Had someone been watching me? Studying my habits? Learning the way I wrote, the way I signed my name? The idea made my skin crawl. Outside, the street was quiet, the world oblivious to the terror slowly sinking its claws into me. I wasn't just dealing with a forgery. I was dealing with something calculated. Something sinister. And the worst part? I had no idea who was behind it, or how far they'd already gone. Story 6. I had always prided myself on being cautious about my privacy. My doors were always locked, security cameras covered every entrance, and I was mindful of what I shared online. Working from home was an adjustment, but over time, I had settled into the quiet solitude, finding comfort in the control I had over my environment. There was something peaceful about the predictability of it all. But then, everything changed. It started like any other day. My morning routine was the same, coffee in hand, settling into my home office to begin work. Then, my coworker Brian sent me a message on our company chat. Hey, can we talk? I assumed it was about work, a project update or a routine meeting. But when I answered the call, Brian's face appeared on the screen, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something else. Something serious. Hey, he started hesitantly. I need to show you something. I frowned. Sure. What's up? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his phone to the camera. A video played, and at first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then, realization hit me like a cold wave. The backdrop was unmistakable, my home office. My desk. My chair. The bookshelves behind me. And then there I was, sitting at my desk, typing away on my computer. A video of me. But how? No one had ever been in my office except me. I felt my stomach drop. Where did you get this? My voice wavered. Brian shifted uncomfortably. I found it on the company server. In a folder that wasn't mine. I don't know how it got there, but I thought you needed to see it. I leaned in closer, studying the video. It was shot from an angle I didn't recognize, one that wasn't covered by my security cameras. Whoever recorded it had been inside my office. Watching me. I checked the timestamp. It was from the previous day. It was real. It was me. And I had never seen or heard anyone there. Panic clawed at my throat. This isn't possible, I murmured. I would have known if someone was in my house. Brian hesitated before replying. I didn't want to freak you out, but I thought you should know. I asked him to send me the file. Over and over, I watched it, searching for any clue, any sign that could explain what I was seeing. The way it was filmed, just out of sight, just beyond my cameras, made my skin crawl. Had someone been standing there, watching me the entire time? I reached out to IT, desperate for answers. But they found nothing. No unauthorized logins. No unusual activity. No record of any files being uploaded. As far as they could tell, everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the unease. I checked my cameras, double-checked my locks, but everything seemed fine. And yet, I felt it, that lingering sense that I wasn't alone. That someone, somewhere, was watching. Then, a week later, I received another video. But this time, it wasn't from Brian. It came from an unknown email address. With trembling hands, I opened the file. The video was only a few seconds long, but it was enough to paralyze me with fear. It was me. In my bedroom. I watched in horror as I saw myself moving around, tidying up, completely unaware that I was being recorded. My heart slammed against my ribs as my eyes darted to the timestamp. 3 a.m. The night before. I had been asleep. My mind raced. How? My windows were locked. My doors secured. My security system was intact. And yet, someone had been in my bedroom, close enough to capture this footage. I couldn't breathe. Who was doing this? And why? Panic consumed me. I called the authorities, explaining everything, grasping for any kind of explanation. They promised to investigate, but no answers came. No forced entry. No digital footprints. Nothing. It was as if my watcher had vanished into thin air. I changed every password, reinforced every door, set up more cameras, desperate for a sense of security. But it was useless. The damage had already been done. Someone had infiltrated my world, my sanctuary. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the video stopped. Days turned into weeks. Then months. No new footage. No strange messages. No sign of whoever had been watching me. But the fear remained. The unease lingered in the corners of my mind, whispering that this wasn't over. That they were still out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting. And no matter what I did, I would never feel safe again. Story 7. It was just another quiet evening at home. The kind where the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock were the only sounds filling the space. I had settled into my usual routine, sitting at my desk with my laptop open before me, its dim glow casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, everything was still. I cracked my knuckles, ready to dive into work, emails to respond to, tasks to organize, a few updates to send. The rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard filled the silence. It was mundane, mechanical, mindless, until it wasn't. Something shifted. A flicker of movement caught my eye, just a reflection on the screen, I thought. But as I glanced at my inbox, my stomach clenched. There it was, an email sent from my own account. The subject line was unfamiliar, and the recipient's name meant nothing to me. A trick of the system, maybe? A glitch? I clicked on it, hoping to dismiss it as some kind of mistake, but the words inside sent a slow, creeping dread up my spine. The message was eerily formal, concise, professional, yet I knew, without a doubt, that I had never written it. It detailed a project, something intricate and complex, something I had no knowledge of. And it was sent only moments ago. My heart hammered in my chest as I checked my sent folder. There it was, staring back at me like an accusation. The timestamp aligned perfectly. My name was on it. But I had never typed those words. A cold sweat formed at the back of my neck. Had someone accessed my account? I scrambled to check my login history, nothing. No unusual activity, no failed attempts, no unauthorized sign-ins. Everything was normal. Everything was wrong. My fingers trembled as I searched the recipient's name online. Nothing. No social media profiles. No business listings. It was as if the person didn't exist. I scrolled through my contacts, my pulse quickening. Not a single connection. My mind raced. Had my laptop been compromised? But how? It had been in front of me the whole time. Panic slithered into my chest, tightening like a vice. The logical part of me screamed for a rational explanation, but no matter how many scenarios I played through, none of them made sense. Then, in a moment of desperation, I decided to respond. I crafted a short, cautious reply, apologizing for the message and insisting it must have been a mistake. My hands hesitated over the keyboard before I finally pressed send. And then, I waited. Minutes crawled by. The silence in my room thickened, pressing down on me. Then, my phone buzzed. A reply. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry, and opened the message. "Why are you lying?" The words were sharp, immediate. My breath hitched. Lying? About what? My heart pounded so loudly I thought I could hear it echo in the stillness. My fingers hovered over the keys, but before I could formulate a response, another message appeared. "You know what you did. You can't hide it forever." A chill washed over me, icy and suffocating. My vision blurred as dread settled deep into my bones. My own breathing sounded foreign, shallow, distant. I hadn't done anything. I knew that. Didn't I? Shaking, I checked my sent folder again, hoping, praying, that the original email had changed, that there would be some clue, some evidence of tampering. But it remained, unaltered, a silent specter mocking my growing paranoia. I checked my doors. Locked. My windows. Secure. But I no longer felt alone. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, heavier. The air carried an oppressive weight, thick and stifling. My laptop screen reflected my own pale face back at me, but for a fleeting second, I swore there was something else in the reflection, something just behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the feeling remained. Was I being watched? Every creak of the house, every distant rustle of leaves outside, sent fresh waves of fear coursing through me. The messages repeated in my mind, looping over and over. You can't hide it forever. Hide what? What did they think I had done? As the night stretched on, sleep became an impossible thought. I stared at the laptop, waiting, knowing deep down that this wasn't over. Whoever had sent that email, whoever had used my name, my account, my device, they weren't just playing a prank. They knew me. And they were watching. Somewhere, out there in the dark, they were waiting. Story 8. The evening had settled into that peculiar hush, the kind that made the world feel slower, almost dreamlike. The local diner was a familiar refuge, its neon sign buzzing softly against the quiet of the night. I slid into my usual booth, the cozy corner by the window, where I could watch the streetlights flicker over the empty sidewalks. It was a night like any other, or so I had thought. I was still deciding what to order when the waitress approached. With a small wave and a polite smile, I let her know I needed a moment longer. As I turned back to the menu, a shadow moved in my periphery. When I looked up, he was just there. Seated across from me. I hadn't heard him approach. Hadn't seen him enter. But there he was, as if he had always been there, his presence as sudden as it was unsettling. He was an unremarkable man, plain jacket, cap pulled low over his forehead, but there was something in the way he smiled. It was warm, friendly even, but held an undertone of something else. Something I couldn't quite place. "It's the least I can do for you," he said, his voice gentle, yet carrying a weight I didn't understand. I blinked. My mind scrambled for recognition, some flicker of familiarity, but there was none. I didn't know this man. I was sure of it. And yet, he spoke as though we were old friends, as though there was a history between us. I glanced down at my menu, as if it could somehow provide an answer, but the silence between us only thickened, heavy and uneasy. The waitress returned, her notepad ready. Before I could speak, the stranger did. "I'll take care of that for you," he said, nodding toward the menu in my hand. My stomach twisted. The words, so simple, sent an inexplicable chill through me. He didn't look like the kind of person who would offer to buy a meal for a stranger, not out of kindness, not without reason. The waitress hesitated, her eyes flicking between us, her uncertainty mirroring my own. I could see the question forming on her lips, "Do you know him?" But I shook my head quickly, urging her to proceed as if nothing was wrong. Maybe he was just being kind. Maybe people did things like this. Maybe. I forced a smile, the kind that barely reached my eyes. "Thank you, but you really don't have to." He only nodded, his expression unchanged. And then, just for a second, I saw it. A flicker in his eyes. Something dark. Something hidden. I blinked, and it was gone. The air around us seemed to grow heavier, the sounds of the diner, silverware clinking, distant laughter, the soft hum of the refrigerator, suddenly distant, unreal. It was as if I were watching the world through a thin veil, slightly removed from it, slightly, elsewhere. When my food arrived, I exhaled, relieved for the distraction. But as I reached for my drink, I glanced up, and froze. He was gone. The seat across from me was empty, as if he had never been there at all. My breath hitched. I scanned the diner, my gaze darting from table to table, but there was no sign of him. He had vanished. Just, disappeared. My fingers tightened around my fork. The waitress returned, and I hesitated before asking, "The man who was sitting here, where did he go?" She frowned, puzzled. "What man? You've been sitting alone." A coldness seeped into my bones. That wasn't possible. I had just spoken to him. He had been right there. He had paid for my meal. And yet, I barely tasted my food. My mind was a storm of confusion as I left the diner, glancing over my shoulder at every step. The night air felt colder than before, heavier. I half expected to see him standing outside, watching me. But the streets were empty. Silent. That night, I barely slept. The words he had spoken circled my mind like a whisper in the dark, "It's the least I can do for you." What had he meant? Why had he chosen me? Days passed. Then weeks. I returned to the diner more times than I cared to admit, hoping, dreading, that I'd see him again. But I never did. It was as if he had stepped out of my life just as suddenly as he had entered it. And then, months later, the letter arrived. A plain envelope. No return address. No markings. Just my name, scrawled in neat, precise handwriting. Inside, a single piece of paper. A single sentence. "It's the least I can do for you. Remember, you were never alone." My hands trembled. The handwriting was familiar, and the recognition came like a slow-moving horror sinking into my gut. It was the same handwriting from a note I had found years ago. A note I hadn't understood then. A note that had appeared, inexplicably, tucked inside a borrowed book from the library. The realization clawed its way through me. The man hadn't just disappeared. He had left me a message. And I still didn't know what it meant. Story 9. The night had settled in like a thick, suffocating blanket, the kind that presses against your skin and makes the silence feel alive. I had just collapsed onto the couch after a long, exhausting day, mindlessly flipping through channels, searching for anything to distract me from the stillness of my empty house. The quiet was oppressive, almost unnatural, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, it happened. The TV flickered violently before turning on by itself. I froze. I hadn't touched the remote. I hadn't moved. And yet, there it was, glowing in the dim light of the room, its soft hum the only sound breaking the uneasy silence. At first, I tried to brush it off as a simple glitch, maybe a power surge, maybe some interference. But as my eyes locked onto the screen, my stomach twisted into a cold knot. It wasn't a show. It wasn't static. It was my front door. A live feed, black and white, grainy yet unmistakable. The wooden frame, the peeling paint, the dim porch light flickering above, it was my door, the very same one I had just locked behind me minutes ago. My pulse spiked, a slow creeping dread slithering up my spine. I sat up straight, heart hammering. How was this possible? There were no cameras outside my house. No security system. No reason for my TV to be showing me this. I swallowed hard and stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. The door was closed, just as I had left it. But the longer I looked, the more I felt something was wrong. Something was off. The air in the room thickened, growing heavy like a storm was about to break. A suffocating weight pressed against my chest. My breathing shallowed. Then, the image on the screen shifted. My blood ran cold. A shadow. Tall. Motionless. Looming just beyond the doorframe. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no clothing, just an elongated figure standing impossibly still, as if waiting for me to notice it. The more I stared, the more I felt its presence seeping into the room, filling the space around me with something unseen, something wrong. I clutched the remote, my fingers trembling as I frantically pressed buttons, trying to change the channel, to erase the image, but the screen wouldn't budge. It was locked, frozen on that one horrifying view. Then, as if responding to my fear, the figure began to move. Not a normal movement, no shifting of weight, no natural steps. It glided forward, closing the distance between itself and the door with an unnatural grace. My stomach lurched as its edges became more defined, its limbs too long, its presence too real. Then, the doorbell rang. The sharp chime cut through the suffocating stillness like a blade. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard footsteps. Hadn't heard a car pull up. Nothing. Just the bell. My body screamed at me to stay put, to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard. But some twisted compulsion drove me forward. I moved to the window, hesitated, then peeked outside. Nothing. The porch was empty. The street, lifeless. I turned back to the TV. My hands went numb. The screen had changed again. The camera, if that's what it was closer now. Zoomed in on the door handle. And it was shaking. Something was trying to get inside. My entire body locked up, every muscle stiff with fear. The doorknob rattled harder now, twisting back and forth, violently struggling against the lock. The doorbell rang again. Louder. More insistent. And then came the knocking. Soft at first. Just a faint tap. Then another. Then. Bang. 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 The entire door shuddered under the force of the blows. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. Desperate, I grabbed the remote again, jamming my thumb against the power button. The TV refused to turn off. The image refused to change. Then. The door on the screen swung open. Wide. Empty. My stomach lurched violently. The shadow was gone. The breath hitched in my throat as I turned my gaze back to the room. The air was freezing now. The lights flickered, shivering against the darkness creeping into the space between seconds. And then I heard it. A whisper. So close. Too close. I'm here. The voice was behind me. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, but there was nothing. Just the empty, suffocating darkness of my living room. Then my eyes flicked back to the screen. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. A live feed of my own face, my own expression twisted in terror. And behind me, just barely visible in the reflection. The shadow. Standing right there. Watching. Waiting. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew it was too late. Story 10. The air in my office always carried a certain stillness, a quiet hum of solitude that I had grown accustomed to. As I pushed open the door, it groaned softly on its hinges, a sound I had heard 1,000 times before. But tonight, something was different. The moment I stepped inside, an uneasy feeling settled over me. My desk, usually cluttered with scattered papers and an errant pen or two, held something out of place. A pair of glasses sat there, neatly placed atop my notebook. Not just any glasses. My glasses. I froze. My pulse quickened as I stared at them, waiting for some explanation to present itself. They didn't move, didn't shift under my gaze, but their presence alone sent a cold tremor through me. I hadn't left them there. I was sure of it. I had been wearing them all day, and I never misplaced them. My office door was always locked. No one else had been home. Swallowing the creeping dread, I stepped forward and hesitantly picked them up. The frame was familiar, the weight perfect in my hand. My thumb brushed against a small smudge on the lens, the same one I had noticed that morning. I held them up to my own, still perched on my face. Identical. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. It didn't make sense. I turned, scanning the office, my breath hitching as I strained to hear any sign of intrusion. Silence. A silence that now felt too loud. My desk lamp flickered for a brief second, casting uneasy shadows along the walls. My rational mind fought against the mounting fear. Perhaps I had absent-mindedly brought a second pair in? No. That was impossible. I only owned one. Frowning, I reached for my desk phone and dialed my best friend. The dial tone felt like an eternity before they finally picked up. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Can you think of any reason why I'd find an identical pair of my own glasses on my desk?" A pause. Then, "What do you mean identical?" Their voice held an edge of confusion. "I mean exactly the same. Same frame, same lenses, even the same damn smudge I noticed this morning. It's like someone took them off my face and left them here without me knowing." "Are you sure you didn't leave them somewhere else?" I shook my head, despite knowing they couldn't see me. "Positive. I never take them off. And I haven't been anywhere but home all day." Another long silence. Then, a quiet but serious, "Okay, that's weird. Maybe you should check the rest of the house." I hung up, unease curling around me like a fog. Taking their advice, I stepped out of my office and moved through the house, flicking on every light as I went. The living room, normal. Kitchen, unchanged. Bathroom, empty. Yet the air felt thick, charged, as though something unseen lingered just out of reach. I returned to my office, my nerves on edge. The glasses still sat on the desk, taunting me with their impossible presence. I exhaled slowly, trying to shake the anxiety gnawing at me. Just then, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Soft. Measured. Coming from the hallway. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard the door open. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I turned toward the sound. The footsteps stopped. The air thickened, pressing down on me with an unseen weight. Slowly, I approached the door, my hand hovering over the handle. It was closed. Yet, it creaked open on its own. I stared. The hallway beyond was empty. Swallowing hard, I stepped out, my eyes darting down the corridor. Nothing. No sign of movement. And yet, the feeling of being watched was suffocating. The shadows seemed deeper, the quiet more oppressive. A whisper of something unseen brushed against my senses, raising every hair on my body. Heart hammering, I backed into my office and shut the door, turning the lock with a shaky hand. My gaze snapped to the desk. The glasses. My breathing came shallow now as realization settled over me like ice. I never heard anyone come in. Never heard anyone leave. And yet, the glasses had appeared. I reached for them, fingertips trembling, but the moment I touched the frame, the lights flickered, once, twice, then cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. A chill wrapped around me, seeping into my bones. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then, the sound of breathing, close. Too close. Not mine. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat a deafening thud against the unnatural silence. And then, light. The room returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. My gaze flicked back to the glasses, but this time, I didn't touch them. I couldn't. Something had changed. Something I wasn't ready to understand. I turned, left the office, locked the door behind me. And this time, I didn't look back.